Hi, welcome class. Today I'm going to be going over the Walter Benjamin, Susan Sontag, and Roland Barthes readings and tying them all together and explaining how they fit into the overall ideas of the course. First, I wanted to start off by clarifying one thing. Based on the quiz from a couple of days ago, there seemed to be a little bit of confusion about what Philip Auslander's response would be to the short video, "I Forgot My Phone." And half of you seemed to kind of grasp how Auslander would approach this. The other half of the class seemed to feel that Auslander would actually think that this video is in line with his arguments. And what I wanted to clarify was that according to the video, at many times in the short film that we watched, there is this clean line between the mode of documentation and the actual event itself, and that staring at your phone or taking pictures seems to actually pull you out of the live event. And so throughout the film, the argument seems to be that the act of documentation actually removes you from the live event, and that actually is absolutely counter to what Auslander's arguing. Auslander's point is that we've been arguing that these things are separate, and they're not. That the act of documentation is as much a part of the live event as the event itself. That to understand what liveness means, especially in the digital age, you have to understand that our experience of events is very much dependent on the act of documentation. That documentation is a part of the ways that we experience everyday life, not separate from it. It's not a separate realm, and we tend to fetishize certain modes of connectivity, and that's essentially what I Forgot My Phone is doing. It's fetishizing a pre-mediated interaction between friends or between lovers or between social experiences that people might have. And we have to ask ourselves, have we ever been in a moment of pre-mediation? Have we ever been in experiences where mediation hasn't necessarily played an important role in how we understand the world around us? And as long as there's been modes of documentation, starting with writing, essentially the ways that we've understood the world have always been influenced by documents, by the things that people either show us or tell us about the world. They always will influence the ways that you think about the world. So just to clarify at the beginning here, if Auslander were watching this video, he would essentially say it's a flawed logic, that there is a distinction between a live event and the modes of documentation of that event. Instead, these two things have to be understood as being so intermeshed that you can't take them apart. So Walter Benjamin's article, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, is a really famous essay. There's so much richness to it. I've been teaching this essay since 2007, I think, and I read it every time I teach it, reread it, and I still think that I'm slowly coming to understand Benjamin's arguments. So if certain parts of this were a little unclear, you're in good company. It takes a while, I think, to really absorb his arguments. And for Benjamin, what I tell people is that as he's writing this, the process of writing for Benjamin is the process of discovery. At moments he'll change his mind, and at moments he'll discover things, and his discovery is actually in the process of writing. And that's sometimes what makes it difficult, and I think if you approach Walter Benjamin's writings as this mode of discovery, it makes a lot more sense. For him, he's trying to figure things out. What does he feel about the aura? Does it exist in the age of mechanical reproduction, or doesn't it exist? Is something lost in the age of mechanical reproduction? Yes, in some senses there's a lot of loss, but at the same time, is what we're losing in the age of mechanical reproduction simply something we've fetishized as a culture? Probably. I think he does feel that that's probably the case. So for Benjamin, he begins by really noting that art has always been understood as something that's been reproducible. It's been counterfeited, it's been somehow copyable throughout history. But the question then remains, why does a work of art become valuable at all? If it's something that can be reproducible, why do we give it value? Why do paintings sell for millions and millions of dollars if I can hang a poster of it on my wall, or if someone can recreate that painting to the T, to the place that I would never recognize that it's a fake? If art has always been reproducible, what gives it value? And Benjamin writes that essentially even the most perfect reproduction of a work of art is lacking in one element: its presence in time and space, its unique existence at the place where it happens to be. And he goes on to say that the presence of the original is the prerequisite to the concept of authenticity. So culturally, we've had this idea of authenticity, of the authentic, of the actual thing as opposed to a fake thing, the reproduction, and we've separated these two ideas about an original and a reproduction, authentic and fake. And we've traditionally kept these things very separate, and part of that is the rarity, and I pointed to this in the last lecture that I gave, that rarity is often the thing that gives it value, like going to a concert, being there in the ephemeral moment. That rarity is often the cultural value of the reason why we go to a live event. Similarly, art has rarity to it. The Mona Lisa, there's one of them. There are many reproductions, but there is one hanging in the Louvre, and you can go and stand near it, and there is no comparison to being that close to the original, to the authentic version of the Mona Lisa. He brings up two key terms throughout the essay that are terms that are pretty problematic, things that we need to analyze in depth and use with a bit of suspicion. The first is the term authenticity. What does it mean to be authentic? That's an important question. And the second is the aura. What is the aura? And with the Mona Lisa, the aura is its rarity in time and space, is that it exists only in that one location. It doesn't exist elsewhere, except in reproductions. So the aura is its essence in that time and space where it happens to be at that moment, and it is nowhere else in the world. That's essentially what that quote meant from Benjamin. And in that sense, the aura is about how close you are to something. Where he writes, it's essentially the unique phenomenon of a distance, however close it may be. And essentially the value of art and the aura there is often about bringing close that thing that's rare and being as close to it as possible. We try to get a hold of an object. That's the aura, is trying to get a hold of what's valuable, what is really rare, what is authentic about that one work of art. And this, in a sense, is an aura. But then the question becomes, what happens in the age of photography? What is the original photograph? Is it the first print that was made off of a negative? Is it the first print that Ansel Adams signed from his negative? Or is it the negative itself? And if you think about it, for an Ansel Adams photograph, is the 18,000th print that was drawn off of an original negative, is that valuable, and why? What makes that valuable? What makes that work of art, that 18,000th print that was made off of that original negative of Ansel Adams, valuable? Is it because of the negative? So is the negative then the work of art, or is the print the work of art? Why aren't we trying to buy the negative and we're buying the work of art? Is it the signature showing that he was there, that he authorized it? So for Benjamin, in the age of mechanical reproduction, in the age where you can just take a photograph and reproduce it, and you have 18,000 of them, where is the aura? Where is the authentic? Where's the original photograph? This brings up a lot of problems for us when we think about value, because rarity used to equal value. There's one Mona Lisa, but there are 18,000 of these other photographs. Why are they valuable? So what makes something rare? What makes it authentic in an age where we're no longer designing for authenticity and rarity? All of our media, as we'll talk about in my next lecture, are designed for sharing. They're designed for reproduction. The very essence of the medium is that it can be infinitely reproduced. That's the essence of digital media, that it's all boiled down to code, and in that code is the essence of sharing, that we can share it. So what's the original? Where do then we find value when that authenticity in the aura essentially isn't a part of the production process of art anymore? So these are the questions that he's getting at, and ultimately the answers to some of those questions are essentially the answer for what an aura is and what is authentic is always culturally specific. It's always about how you answer that question situated within the values of your culture. If you brought photographs to the culture of Renaissance painting, there would be some value in the ability to use technical precision to capture the world, but in terms of artistry, it would not necessarily be considered artistry. You clicked a shutter. Why are you an artist? So the difference between the process of creating a painting and the process of creating a photograph would, in some eras, seem vastly different. To our own, we don't necessarily see it that way. Photography for us as a culture is art. It can be true art, and it can be amateur, the same way painting has always been amateur drawing, but there are artists who are photographers. So for our culture, we contextualize a certain kind of authenticity for prints of photographs that have the artist's signature on it. We give value to negatives. We give value to certain artistic things related to reproduction that may in other settings not have any value at all. It's always culturally specific. So what equals the aura? It absolutely doesn't have anything to do with the essence of an object, with the true nature of an object. It has to do with the value that a culture gives an object. So the aura is not necessarily this innate essence of a thing. It's instead the essence that we give it as a culture. And there's that difference there. Same thing with the idea of authenticity. It's always culturally specific. What does something authentic mean? It depends on who you ask. I have friends who are from Philadelphia, and they will talk about what is an authentic Philly cheesesteak. It depends. It depends on how your parents made it. It depends on the shop that you went to in Philly. It depends on if you've grown up with getting cheesesteaks in New York, and so all of these things, what constitutes an authentic dish, it actually matters where you're talking about it, what culture you're talking about it from, what perspective, what background. Authentic varies from situation to situation, from context to context. And it applies to food, it applies to art, it applies to performance, it applies to a wide range of things. The authentic you. Who is the authentic you? It depends. It depends on the context, right? It depends on who you're interacting with. The authentic you in a classroom is a different authentic you when you're with your friends, or a different authentic you when you're with your parents. Doesn't mean it's less authentic in any of those. It's just culturally and contextually specific. So Benjamin talks about it, the essence of the photograph, and when we shift into Susan Sontag, she's talking about the practice of taking a photograph. So the shift of looking at photographs as cultural objects to then looking at photographs as a practice, the practice of taking photographs. And in our era, she's arguing the era of the photograph, ever since cameras became public and widely usable, photography has taught us how to see. It's taught us what to look at. And she has a great quote on page 3 that, in teaching us a new visual code, photographs alter and enlarge our notions of what is worth looking at and what we have the right to observe. They are a grammar and, even more importantly, an ethics of seeing. Throughout her essay, the one thing that's the important takeaway here is that photographs are a part of our world. Taking photographs, in essence, becomes a part of how we practice everyday life. They don't necessarily document everyday life, they actually become incorporated into how we understand our everyday lives. So they're not these separate objects that exist in the world. They are a practice that then tells us about the world. They teach us a grammar, an ethics of the visual, an ethics of seeing, an understanding of how to look at things. And this is very much in line with Auslander and with Benjamin about the idea of the interrelationship between events and documents, and also documents as a way of bringing things close to us, of taking ownership over the world around us, of claiming it, taking a photograph as a practice, regardless of the end outcome of the actual photograph. The practice of taking photographs is a practice of ownership of the world and an ownership of your identity in that world, your ability to stake claim in your position within the world through the practice of documenting it. So there's an interesting tension in Sontag that I think carries over throughout all three of these readings about the fact that we capture the world around us through photographs, but photographs don't capture everything. They only capture what exists inside the frame. Everything outside of that frame is either left to memory or lost completely if we weren't the photographers. So it's this vacuum of a snapshot of a moment that doesn't necessarily capture everything, but at the same time we're using them as evidence. We imagine them sometimes as being objective capturing of a moment. Think of Google Street View as a capture of a moment, or even imagery as this thing that captures a moment in time as it really was. So they're used as evidence, as a sense of objectivity in some senses, and in another sense they're actually used as extreme versions of subjectivity. This is my view of the world as an individual. And so there's a tension between photographs not necessarily capturing everything, but then at the same time the feeling that photographs are proof. So there's a back and forth between the subjectivity and objectivity of what a photograph actually accomplishes. For Sontag, she is arguing for an understanding of the impact of taking a photograph on the actual practice of identity in everyday life. The practice of taking a photograph is important to her. In the way that Benjamin might look at the act of viewing a photograph, in the same way Roland Barthes looking at his mother's photographs, that sort of act of viewing very much being a part of who you are. For her, the act of taking a picture is a part of who you are. And if you think about this, I remember distinctly going to my in-laws' house and sitting through 300 photographs of a trip they took to the Amazon. And the Amazon visually is so amazing to look at, but when you're looking at 300 photographs of a trip you didn't go on, it doesn't hold the same weight. It doesn't necessarily hold the same meaning to you. By 50 photographs in, you're like, I kind of understand, you know, your trip. 300, I don't know if I can sit through 300, except to be extraordinarily polite. The photographs actually don't hold the same weight for you. The photographs hold the weight for the photographer. In those instances, taking the photographs was an important act of inscribing memory, not even because of the end outcome again. It's about the process of taking that photograph that makes it an important action for remembering moments in your everyday life. So moving into a little bit of Roland Barthes, I just want to point to the beginning section of his essay, thinking about him rummaging through old photographs of his mother soon after she passed away as a mode of trying to capture her again, and the frustration of that, of the fact that photographs don't capture everything, and you want them to be the truth of who that person was. The truth of their face, the truth of their being, and they never quite capture that. And the frustration of trying to identify that. And for Roland Barthes, all the tensions that we've been talking about between what a photograph means, what it does culturally, and how we incorporate the act of taking photographs into everyday lives, these are all bound up in Camera Lucidia, the book that this section is drawn from Roland Barthes. And for him, he begins by saying that photographs announce history. They announce that there existed a time before you. Look at your parents in these clothes. They existed before you did. And you get to look at these snapshots that announce history, and history as a thing that you weren't a part of. And simultaneously, photographs announce your mortality, because somebody is going to be looking at pictures of you in dated clothes long after you're gone. So there's this odd tension between the announcing of history and your experience of understanding your own mortality through viewing photographs. So he's looking for the truth of his mother's face and being through these photographs, and eventually stumbles across a photograph that does capture an essence of her, that an aura perhaps of who she was, that he's trying to get at, a photograph taken long before he was born. And the question is really, where does this truth lie in photographs? Where is the truth of a photograph? In one sense, it's internal to the photograph, what the photograph itself evokes in terms of memories, emotions, how it's able to tap into your sensory being in the world through the object of the photograph. And part of it is also external to the ways that it draws out these other senses that aren't necessarily a part of the photograph. So there's this back and forth between the internal nature of what a photograph can accomplish as a medium and how it can evoke a wider range of memory experiences that exist outside of the photograph, outside of the realm of that. And one of the things that we will look at is how the nature of that very photograph is shifting in the digital age. What a photograph as an object means in our era. And that's what we're going to be looking at toward the end of the week, thinking about how digital photography is changing the very nature of photography itself. So we'll have another lecture this week that I'll post on Friday. Your actor networks are also due that day on Friday. And please let me know if you have any questions about the assignment. I'm happy to help you bounce ideas around or answer any questions that you have for any of the assignments that we are going through. And I'm really enjoying the tweets and enjoying the selfies as well, and look forward to that through the rest of the week.